It's the show where Hawaii's newsmakers come to talk and to take your questions live. From the nation's capital to Honolulu Hale, from the state legislature to the fifth floor. We bring the experts to you and ask them what you want to know. Spotlight Hawaii with Yunji Denise and Ryan Pelesuji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.
Well, happy Aloha Friday. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I'm Yunji Denise, joined by Ryan Pelesuji here on Spotlight Hawaii, airing on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. Ryan, fresh off the State of the City address, we are heading to Honolulu Hale today for a very special guest.
Yeah, that's right. Joining us this morning, someone we have a lot of things issue to talk about. Joining us is Mayor Rick Blangiardi. Good morning, Mayor. Thanks so much for joining us, and happy St. Patrick's Day.
Well, thank you for that. Good morning, Yunji. Good morning, Ryan, and happy St. Patrick's Day to you too.
We have a lot of things
today.
We are all participating. Okay. We have a number of things we want to talk about. Let's begin and start off right at the top with recently on Wednesday, Honolulu City Council passed a bill that would ban guns from insensitive places that they deem, such as schools and hospitals. Wanted to get your thoughts as it now comes to your desk. Is this something that you approve of and that you plan on signing into law?
Well, absolutely. Actually, our initiative at the time that we learned the Supreme Court ruling on open carry, and then reading through it and realizing that the counties would have the ability to make those kinds of determinations, I actually called our corporation counsel in, and I asked which lawyer in our building we could handle this the best. And just so happens Dana Viola, who's our corporation counsel, picked Dan Gluck, who joined us only a little bit more than a year ago, having run the State Ethics Commission. Dan's a very fine attorney, and I actually said to him at the time, I want to be as aggressive on this as we possibly can with respect to protecting people, at the same time knowing we have a responsibility to uphold the Supreme Court ruling and people's basic Second Amendment rights. But looking at who we've been historically as a culture, looking at the macro dynamics, it doesn't really happen here, although we still have way too much gun violence. I wanted to be able to do that. And so the sensitive places concept for me makes common sense. And as I saw yesterday in your paper, the 13 things listed, I have a hard time anybody telling me why they've got to take, a gun into a church or a school or a hospital or a public gathering. I just don't get that. So we're not telling people they can't have guns. I think I reported yesterday to somebody we've gotten some 700 and odd applications from a little bit less than 500 people, of which to date, based on my last conversation with Chief Logan just a couple of days ago, we've approved a little bit less than 40. We'll continue in that process for those people qualified. We're not going to say they can't do that, but we do have a right to say where they can. So the other thing that we're going to be doing is issuing online, and we met last night because apparently one of the things got worked through is that, they're going to provide businesses with signs that we're going to both manufacture and have available online that need to be posted if people are going to allow in private places guns to be there, or if guns are not allowed there to post. So I don't think some of the places like churches and schools are going to have to post, but I think we're going to work through all of that. But honestly, to me, it's just in keeping, understanding the Supreme Court ruling, but in keeping with who we are as a people. And I think that, for all that we talk about local government, that's precisely what it is. Local government is local government. And this is our community, our culture, and it's how we choose to interpret this ruling.
Some of the opponents to this, there are 3 on the city council who voted against it. And one of the concerns that council member Val Okimoto voiced was just an enforcement issue. She thinks that this will be a very difficult thing to enforce, not necessarily in a place like a school, but perhaps some of the language is rather broad. Do you have enforcement concerns? And also, what do you think about the burden that this now places on officers to figure out, where things are allowed and where they're not?
Yeah. Well, I don't think it puts that much of a burden on them, and nobody's going to be doing body searches. I mean, candidly speaking, I believe today that there are people probably walking around with concealed weapons. Okay. I believe that, and we're not enforcing it, and it is what it is. And you hope to God that that's not going to result in some kind of criminal activity. But if somebody walks into a church with a gun and it's an open carry situation, it's probably going to be pretty easy to enforce. I don't want to do it on the what ifs. The enforcement is always going to be a challenge for us on so many things, especially where and I don't want to have a police state, and we don't have a police state. In fact, I get concerned about trying to increase our numbers so we can improve protection for people. But at the end of the day, this is where you kind of rely on integrity of society. So if one were to think in that regard that everybody's going to say, well, the hell with the rules, I'm buying a gun, I have a gun, I'll take it anywhere I want to go. If it starts to turn into something like that, it'll be a different kind of enforcement. But right now, you got look, I can tell you this. I'm going to say this as clearly as I can. For the amount of people that came into protest versus the overwhelming support we got from the majority of people everywhere on this island, from all kinds of groups in support of sensitive places, so far overwhelms. And that tells me our society doesn't want it, okay? And they're very comfortable with it. So you're going to get renegade behavior. You get it all the time. Crimes happen every day. You can't sit there and say this piece of legislation is going to spur that. This is about protecting the public and keeping the public from harm. And as I said the other day in my State of the City address, if I've learned anything, and there have been a lot of things I've learned as being mayor, it's especially the gravitas, the responsibility of keeping people free from harm.
I want to also move on to something else that you discussed in your speech, and that is, of course, rail, announcement of possibly when this could be open for riders to experience it, coming from the west side going all the way to Aloha Stadium. Your thoughts on where we're at with rail as a whole, and any updates you can provide us about some of the developments that have been made.
You danced around the July word, Ryan. I thought you were going to say July. We put a stake in the ground. We wrote that speech, and initially that speech was, we were going to say this summer, but I've looked at all the evidence and have talked enough with Roger Morton, who's going to be in charge of operating and maintenance from DTS now, because the city takes over the operations once Hitachi finishes. So we just said it's going to be July. I'm very excited about it. Because I think it starts to create a different, I think there's going to be a couple of different dynamics that are about to happen with rail. First of all, are operating it, and those people who choose to ride right now in its current structure from East Kapolei to Aloha Stadium. Then the other dynamic is going to be what we talked about, which is it was always designed to be multimodal. And this is where the pressure really comes on. Not so much the rail's availability to operate, I think, in July. It's making sure we have the multimodal, because we've made that promise. There'll be buses waiting for you as you get off the train to take you downtown, to take you to UH, to really capitalize on the time savings as an incentive on the time that it takes to drive from Kapolei to Aloha Stadium in 20 minutes on the rail, and then in express lanes, get people to other places. We want to create that. So that's the second thing that's going to be interesting to watch in this first phase of opening. And then the other thing is, as we continue construction, and I don't know the last time either one of you has gone down Dillingham Boulevard, but you should do that and see the dynamic of that as we begin to come now into what is the toughest part of construction, which they knew all along, all that many years ago. But to come down now and wrap around Middle Street and come down to the Dillingham corridor and all the things that have to happen there, and then down through to the outskirts of Kakako, eventually going through downtown, Dillingham Boulevard to downtown is going to be a masterful piece of construction. But I think when that becomes, irrespective of the nuisance of street closures, but when the reality of rail being right there is in the urban center is going to also create a very different dynamic. And I think I don't like to speculate, but I have a lot of confidence that once people start to ride rail, because I've talked to transportation experts from all over the country over the last couple of years and listened to them and listened to other things that they've dealt with in other municipalities when they've built rail, when they built transit systems, and the people who say, yeah, I'll never ride it. Next thing you know, there's a lot of ridership. So I'm excited about this. This is really a transformative piece of construction. And we, all of us, me and you and everybody else, we're all living in that moment in time. This is historic. I'm excited about it.
I'm excited to take a ride as well. Have you had an opportunity to actually ride this train, and what was that like?
I did. I have to tell you, I was surprised. It really is very cool, because I'll tell you the first thing that hits you, because we all ride on the streets here, right? And we don't have bridges to drive over and whatever other than ground level bridges. That elevated view is I think people are going to be really surprised and find that to be very attractive. Okay. And then I think also the size of the cars, of course, they're brand new, but the cleanliness, and we expect to keep them up. and they're quiet. I mean, I've ridden subways, having grown up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but I've ridden subways in pretty much a lot of major cities, and they're a lot noisier than this. This is quite a construction feat.
I know you're very confident saying July as when this starts, but another point that a lot of people are looking at is the airport and when that opportunity is going to be available for those who believe that the route, at least past the Aloha Stadium to the airport and that station, will be a game changer for some in transportation and giving access to those coming into the island. Is there any thought of when that portion of the rail will be complete and that ridership will be available?
Yes, and either you didn't watch the State of the City or you weren't paying attention, but I'm going to bail you out on that one, Ryan, okay?
I'm allowing you the opportunity to say to those who
look, I said the other day that we will be at Middle Street 2 years from the opening of this, in the summer of 25 rather. And that will, in effect, will allow us to go through 2 of the 3 top employment centers, being Pearl Harbor Airport second. And so I announced that publicly. That is per charter in the deal. We are already construction-wise confident about that happening. You know, as I said, as we come around Middle Street now down the Dillingham corridor, is when all the heavy lifting over the next number of years that's going to take us to get to Civic Center. But no, we're going to be that. So I'm excited about that too, because, you know, not only are we starting it now, and look, I'm not trying to rush my life, nobody's life. Time goes by way too fast. But, you know, to be able to get through the 2 of the 3 top in what we're trying to ultimately create in a fully functional rail system to really, you know, take people at least to 3 big employment centers. Then, of course, the next phases will become on the educational institutions and whatever. But in that regard, I feel really good. So we start this summer, and in 2 years from now, we get there. I think it is going to be a game changer. I think, again, with the added construction and the reality of that, and hopefully the ridership and the good buzz and everything else, it's just gonna move its way into how we live. People, especially people ultimately who'll be living in, you know, around the transit-oriented development that we also see planned. But this is, you know, well into the future, but it'll start to happen.
I want to ask you a little bit more about some of the things that you did outline in your State of the City. You called these the so-called wicked problems, which was a very interesting phrasing. I'm just interested on how you got to that phrasing. That's, you know, not something that we've heard in the past, and why you decided to frame it in that way. And then ask you specifically about your tax relief plan for people who have had some unusually high assessments after COVID.
Okay, and I hope you two forgive me for taunting you a little bit about listening to the State of the City, but obviously just gonna have a little bit of fun with you guys. This job is very serious. So that term, wicked problems, has actually been around in academia since the 70s. When we were fortunate enough to be accepted to the Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative, and I had the opportunity to go back to New York myself as part of a cohort of 40 mayors, 23 from the United States, and the balance were from 11 countries over 4 continents. So it's an incredible learning experience locally, nationally, and internationally, globally, really. For me, that was a term the professors used that we really liked. By the way, I shared that learning experience widely. We had a number of my senior cabinet members participate. Most of us were doing 4 and 5 a.m. Zoom calls throughout the year. It was pretty rigorous to keep up with it after I did the initial orientation there, but it was very educational. It was very challenging. And what it did was it gave you a perspective on the things that we're dealing with here and how people deal with them elsewhere. So this notion of wicked problems, as I said, that terminology, the problems that plague municipal governments everywhere, they're long-standing problems. They're complicated. They've been attempted to be resolved in prior times, only to no avail. They linger, they persist. The public grows weary of them. They're fed up with them. And it's those things that, from a leadership standpoint, that just add to the gravitas and the responsibility of the role of being mayor and how you're going to approach it. We made a decision coming in as a team that, you know, given the point in time where we were in January 2nd, 2021, and this was something that I went through during the months of November and December as part of our interview strategy in selecting our cabinet, which was a tremendous cabinet, which, as I said many times, I didn't come in here alone. I came in with about 50 people. We talked about the tough problems. And so, look, there is no way to dance around the wicked problems, if you will, which have been well reported on. And as I said earlier, the public is sick of. When we start talking about homelessness and affordability, two distinct problems, interconnected, but require two different distinct strategies. Talking about the rail, which was its own beast, especially given the circumstances of what we walked into at the time that we came into it. So all of that stuff needed to be solved, and then you get into some of the other things that are in wicked problems. In fact, at one point, I had kind of a top 10 list. We decided that sounded a little cute, so we didn't want to do that. But you start to go down the line on the things that we need to address that have been long overdue, and we've decided to take that on. And I felt really pleased and really proud. In fact, I will tell you, when I wrote this speech initially, I had almost 3 yellow notebook pads filled. I handed it over to Scott Hummer, Director of Communications, and Ian Stewart for your help, and Mike, because it was like a 2-hour speech. There was so much to talk about, and how can we try to get it down to an hour? But a lot of it is tied to taking on these really tough, long-standing problems and really making a difference. And I really believe we're going to do that. And I said in the speech the other day, which is kind of bold, I think we can have a lasting impact, this administration, on generations to come for the city and county. I think we all see ourselves at that moment in time to perhaps change the trajectory of where the city was headed by tackling the tough stuff and actually doing something about it, which led to, I give you guys time to ask me a question, which led to what I talked about in systemic changes. You've heard me say this before, understand the problem first, really deeply understand the problem before you talk about the solutions. And then you've got to be willing. Once you've done that, there's a process to this. We talked about it the other day, and what they talked about was execution as learning, okay? Or learning as execution. You could say it either way. That you have to be open to taking risk and new ideas. And anytime you're going to do that, that's tough. But if you're going to look at a problem systemically, and the first thing that jumps at you is the fact that the organizational structure is a big part of the problem, then you've got to be willing to look at that organizational structure. So that's why we talked about that kind of stuff. And it's all bold, it's big, and we expect to be able to execute.
Well, just end up as a follow-up, if you can expand a little more on the tax relief question and how
Sure.
you plan to provide that relief.
Yeah. Well, we've been public about it. And I've heard Andy Quano, our Director of Budget and Fiscal Services, say we were surprised by the assessments. That caught all of us off guard. And I think it was written about and reported on extensively. So right from the get-go, we said we need to do something about that. But it was early on at that point. These were only assessments. The bills hadn't go on. This is going to be for 24. And so how can we remedy that? And there were a lot of different possibilities in thresholds and formulas and whatever. And really what evolved is something I feel really proud of, because it really is historic in the context that, yes, it was done once before, and I forget what year, where the city government provided tax exemptions, but it was for $200. We looked at this across the board and said, okay, I want to do something significant. What can we afford? Knowing that we're putting together this budget, we have a lot of increased costs, but we do rely on property taxes, for our source of revenue. This is different about government versus private sector, because you rely on that source of funds on how you operate. So with a lot of cooperation from our team and everything else that came in, what we came up with amount of money, as it turned out, we felt we could do $300 per household of the 152,000 homes that have home exemptions, and those home exemptions are $100,000. Well, the equivalent $300 equates to an $86,000 addition to that 100,000. So what I love about the system is that property values went up everywhere, but the people on the lower end of the spectrum, in their houses, their valuations went up. $86,000 is going to be significant financial relief to them and their families, additional, because the house might not have even appreciated that much. As you go up to the higher ends, it's a good cost savings. It's a one-time only effort, and that took us $45.5 million that we're putting back there, or not collecting and giving people exemptions. I feel really good about that because it's got a lot of social equity to it. It makes sense. It's simple to execute. And so that's what we've got going.
And it is a one-time, as you mentioned, a one-time exemption. Do you anticipate having to revisit this next year? Because we know that evaluations, they also rely on past year's data. So there is a concern that things could stay high. And what will that mean next year?
Well,
this year, but what about next year?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Yunji. And I don't expect there's going to be a precipitous decline in home ownership value. But this is going to be one time. I don't have an ability to predict the future, and we'll see. I don't necessarily believe that we would do it again. We have to take a look at where we are on a macro basis at that time, and we'll evaluate it. But we felt that this time, remember, this was such an anomaly. Historically, retail sales of real estate in the market had never exceeded $10 billion in a given year. In fact, on most years, it averaged around $7 billion. It jumped to $12.4 billion. And so it was a 12.4% increase too. So this was really an atypical year. And so I would like to think that things will stabilize a bit on a going forward basis. We've already seen some reports that median prices have come down slightly, but this was an aberration driven by low interest rates, Hawaii's iconic appeal, big money being available elsewhere came in. A lot of these prices were driven by properties being bought on the North Shore and elsewhere, paying big premiums.
One of the challenges that you've had to deal with in terms of within your administration and department has been what's happening at DPP. We've talked about this multiple times on this broadcast about some of the challenges that exist within the department and the wait time for those individuals who currently are still waiting. This idea of splitting up the department has come forward as well. If you can expand a little bit more about where we're at with some of the things that you're doing within the department.
Well, we're doing a lot to DPP, and that is among the wicked problems. I didn't mention it before, but I mean, I actually segued in the speech from after talking about affordable. I knew I wanted to weight the speech on affordable housing, homelessness, and DPP, and I actually prefaced it by saying that DPP was the one department that keeps me up at night because it's a very complex operation because it's a very big department. And I talked about historically back in '97 when they consolidated everything and they just made this thing, from land use to zoning to, we got short-term vacation. There's a long litany of things that go on in the Department of Planning and Permitting. And so we said what we want to look at is to see whether or not adding to our efficiency, whether or not we should split the department or keep it intact, predicated on the things that we're doing now to alleviate. One of them was, we talked about the investments in technology and the investments in people and the willingness and what we're already doing in streamlining some of the processes. The fact that we're using artificial intelligence, I reported on that the other day, and the bot has now, for the most part, not a perfect system, we just implemented, took the wait time in the pre-screening applications down from 5 months to 5 weeks. I said publicly that on average, a DPP of 300 days is unacceptable for people waiting. There's a lot of commerce. That's why we're introducing Bill 6, which is another important and aggressive piece of legislation, and that was born out of the industry. We're talking about self-certification and having licensed professionals, engineers, and architects sign off on that. We're talking about letting go of the restrictions with respect to permits for tenants and letting them begin to do their improvements, knowing that they're going to be subject to inspection ultimately, but not holding them up for people waiting. Sometimes they've all been in the same line, whether I'm going to do a bathroom remodel or I'm going to build a high rise. It's just been a system, as I said, was antiquated, archaic, and broken. We're trying to fix that. But I said, first and foremost, that we're going to start with the smart people who already work in that department. We spent a lot of time. So we've spent the last 2 years doing a master plan on this. So some of it's going to require legislation. Some of it's going to involve investments in technology, qualified people, et cetera. Some of it is also going to involve our industry associations, which now, in changing the leadership out, Don Takeuchi Apuna, who's the director, has been very, very good. And we formed, and I don't like to say it sounds like committees, we are engaging actively, which is also part of what I just said about something like Bill 6, with industry leaders and outside professionals really helping us a lot and taking those into advice. It's almost like having your own board of directors and acting on what the board says. So we're in a level of engagement now of breaking down a lot of the silos and a lot of the dysfunction. The thing about the separation came up, it's not just in DPP, it came up in a couple a couple of departments, as I said the other day about ambulance, emergency services, and ocean safety is another one. That when I just said a few moments ago to you, when you try to understand problems and you look at the structure, that becomes one of the problems. Then you have to be willing to look at that structure and say, should we keep this or should we change it? And if we do, how do we want to change it? And DPP clearly has just become this huge beast. You know, I pointed it out in the State of the City the other day. In 25 years ago, in 1997, the city processed about 14,000 permits, a little bit under, okay? 25 years later, we processed a little bit more than 14,000 permits. Roughly the same amount of permits. The difference this past year, though, was that we had 6,000 that didn't get processed, okay? And in part because of the following. One, in 25 years ago, in 1997, those 14,000 permits had a value, at a production value of a little bit under $800 million. Today, those same, a little bit more than 14,000 permits, we improved almost by 1,000. Those permits had a valuation of $2.5 billion. When you take that into account for inflation and everything else, that's more than $1 billion of construction value. And on top of that, it's how do I want to say this? On top of the construction value, the codes, as a result of the complexity in construction, have changed tremendously over the last 25 years. So if you take the value of those projects, the kinds of projects, okay, to value $2.5 billion, $1 billion increase, 70-some-odd% over. The complexity of those projects, added to that, all the code requirements that have come with that and all the changes. We've looked at it graphically. We've looked at it. I would tell you since really probably the last 7 or 8 years, when they were dealing with these problems, they kept putting ordinance after ordinance and making it more and more difficult. You can look at it on a graph on how it used to go, and it goes up like this. So the point is that's added significantly to the delay. It's not an excuse, and we can remedy that. And like I said earlier, some of it's going to be technology and investment in people. Some of it's going to be legislative, and some of it's going to be, from a system standpoint, what we're doing in the spirit of letting go of some of this stuff that's just caused unnecessary delays. It's a massive undertaking. It's a massive change. But I can tell you this, and I believe this, if there's any department in the city right now linked directly to our economic recovery in this post-pandemic environment going forward, it's the functionality of DPP. And that's where the pressure comes from, and that's why we've got to change it, because it's absolutely significant. It ties to so many things, both from residential all the way up to big commercial projects.
We are almost out of time, but I do want to ask you.
No, this is 1 hour show.
Hey,
I was told
we
to
can always go over. It's cool.
I'm just getting warmed up. Come on, let's go.
One of the things that you've laid out consistently when we've talked to you about, talking about this sort of sea change that you want to make at the office is really the hiring issues. And, we had Joe Logan on earlier this week, the chief of HPD, and he was talking again about the challenges that he's been on the job 9 months. He's had a number of retirements. He is doing everything he can, engaging with the high schools, engaging with college students, trying to get in younger recruits, increase the size of the recruitment classes. And yet he says it's a wash. They still have over 300 vacancies, and they're sort of in the same place. What do you see? If you're talking about making these fundamental shifts, and you really laid this out as a flagship issue for you, the hiring, not just at HPD, but across the board, how do you address that?
Well, and to add to that, which you didn't say, and Chief Logan's gave you a great description of the department and his efforts, but add to that the fact that in this post-pandemic environment, everybody knows that staffing is tough, right? And so we had a lot of systemic problems. I think we reported why it took 180 days to have somebody get hired by the city, totally dysfunctional. We've cut that down. I initially wanted to do it 90 days, and not by 90 days, in 90 days, I reported a 25% decrease. We've cut it down by about 50 days, but it's still cumbersome. We're not competitive with the private sector, but but we're focused on that. And for the first time in 5 years, citywide, we're going to show positive employment growth. I reported this in the state of the city for the first time in 5 years. HPD is its own special problem in that becoming a police officer and the decision to do so has become a more challenging decision, I think, perhaps it's ever been before. And just even yesterday, we had the arrest of 4 officers. This is a very difficult work. And there's been a lot of noise made about it. And we ask a tremendous amount of police officers. So this is just going to be a tough battle for us. We talked earlier about a global perspective or a national perspective. We're not alone right now in our efforts at trying to build up our police department. So, we've talked about incentives. I think it's leadership, it's pride. We're just going to have to be as innovative as we possibly can. They're doing some different things. You don't want to lower the bar. You can't lower the bar on what people have got to be able to qualify to do. You can't mollycoddle them. This is a really difficult job. We're at that moment in time where, unfortunately, there's been a lot of negative press about being a police officer. It has not helped the situation. I believe strongly in Chief Logan. I really like the people he's put around him. Leadership is important. We just have to keep at it. The one thing I will say is that the job itself, for somebody, let's say, who hasn't gone to college, is a high school graduate, within a few years after getting out of college, could be making really good, out of high school, could be making really good money, especially if they want to work a 50-hour week. And that, so from that standpoint, where the rest of the city, we are challenged to compete with the private sector because it's notorious that the city doesn't pay as well as the private sector. But in the police department, as a career opportunity, you can get into, competitively speaking, based on your credentials and qualifications, pretty good income. So that is an overriding essential, but it's tough work. I'm not going to duck that. No easy solution there. There's no shortcut. We just got to stay at it and hope that the leadership and how the department is perceived and the work that they do and people want to be a part of that.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, and as much as we would love to continue this conversation, it always seems like we run short. But thank you for spending your morning with us, updating us on all that's happening there.
Do I get the 20-minute version here? Do I get the 20-minute spotlight?
Get the extended version, man. We're 3 minutes
okay,
over.
All right.
Actually,
okay.
So.
Well, thank you, Paul. Look, I always welcome the opportunity, and I really appreciate and value. As I said before, you two have become real newsmakers, and I take it really seriously whenever I have an opportunity to talk on the show. Let me just close by saying, the reason why my speech initially was 2 hours long is I'm so proud of the team we have. And I wanted that report to be to the city, but also on behalf of them as an appreciation and expression of all the good work they're doing. So I leave you, despite the challenges we have, now 2+ years into the job, feeling very confident about the future ahead.
And I would be remiss, your chief of communications would get on my case if I didn't give you the opportunity also to remind folks about the town halls that you're going to be having.
Ooh, thank you. Yes. So I'm excited about that. It begins next week. In fact, the first week we're going to do 2 on Tuesday and Thursday night. And we're going to take our cabinet members out there as well, either a director or deputy director and all the senior managers. But we're going to begin out in the west side. Tuesday night at 7 o'clock is going to be at Eva. It's going to be at Eva Mackay Middle School. And then on Thursday night at 7 o'clock, it's going to be at the Waikiki District Park. Waianae, rather. I'm sorry. I said Waikiki. Waianae District Park. We're going to be pushing it and hopefully getting a lot of people out there. We're really looking at going out there and creating a bit of an educational journey. There's some things we want to say. We're not going to go out and do, a lot of presentations. I think germane to each community, we'll try to make sure that they're really up to speed on some of the things that are going to directly affect them that we're doing. And then I really want to hear from people. We want to engage them. I think that, as much as I love doing this with you, it's interactive, but it's not the same dynamic if we can actually get in front of these communities. And it's going to be different than a neighborhood board in the way the structure is, because I've gone to neighborhood board meetings, and this is going to be a direct contact, us with them with us. I'm excited about it and all that we're going to learn. But thank you for that opportunity.
Well, thank you, Mayor. We always appreciate it. And again, happy St. Patrick's Day. Thanks for joining us.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Aloha.
Aloha. Always so much to talk about with the mayor, and that is something exciting and different that his administration is taking on. They're going to be doing a series of town halls throughout the state, or rather throughout the county, to really do that a direct engagement. And I'm sure a lot of the issues that we talked about today, Ryan, will be revisited there. We led our conversation talking about the sensitive places legislation that the city council has passed. That they have decided that there are certain areas that, despite citizens now being able to conceal carry weapons in our community, there are certain places where guns do not belong. And the mayor says that he agrees with that. He will be signing that. And not only that, his office is going to make available placards that can be printed out and put into businesses so that restaurants and retail and other businesses can say, hey, we allow guns here, or no, we don't.
Yeah, and we also got an update from his thoughts on where we're at with rail and the reality of that. He very boldly said in his speech, and again reiterated, that by July he is confident that riders will begin and have the opportunity to get on the rail from the west side to Aloha Stadium, and also stating the importance of that becoming a transportation hub for people to then get onto buses and other modes of transportation to travel back into town or any other to their other destination points, and also noting the progress that is being made on Dillingham and getting the next sector of the rail done, which would include the airport and the Middle Street area. So the mayor very confident in where things are at with rail, noting the challenges that currently exist, but confident in the timeline that has been presented and that was presented in his speech earlier this week.
Yeah, and I found his speech so interesting, and that's why I asked that question about why he framed it in the wicked problems, sort of using that language to talk about some of the problems that he noted have persisted our community for years when we talk about affordability with housing, when we talk about homelessness. And he put DPP in that category too, really laying out what he hopes could change in that department, perhaps splitting it into multiple departments, because right now it takes on so much under its consolidated form, and perhaps that having those duties spread out could lead to a lot more efficiency. That's something that he is looking at. He's tasked the director there to come up with some thoughts about whether or not that should be a split agency. He also mentioned in his speech potentially splitting up ocean safety and EMS, which are now one department as well. We encourage you to go back and listen to his speech. It was an hour. He said that initially he wrote a 2-hour speech. I don't doubt it, because there's so much to talk about, but you really feel his energy and his willingness to just head directly into these challenges.
Yeah, and he's at length discussed many of these things that we've talked to him here over the past few months on the show, or year or more, it seems, about some of these same issues, but happy with the mayor seems happy with the progress that they're making within his administration and the changes that he is trying to make, but also noting that there continues to be challenges like the staffing issues that we talked about with Chief Logan at HPD, and some of the challenges that also exist in that same vein, trying to hire and find those adequate workers for the city, noting that there is a big difference between private opportunities in the private sector and jobs there, and what the city has to combat in order to compete with some of those jobs. But says that this is something that he continues to work on, and something that he believes a career path with the police department is also one that many people should look more into as they continue to deal with some of those issues as well at HPD. But always great to catch up with the mayor. On Monday, we will be heading across the street to the state capitol and talking to Governor Green as he dives into his first 100 days in office, some of the accomplishments that he has made within that time, and also some of the setbacks that he's experiencing with a few of his appointees into various departments to lead, as the directors are facing some issues within the Senate and not getting confirmed. We'll talk to him about some of the challenges that exist with some of these nominees that he's putting forth and the plan moving forward. Always a lot to catch up with the governor. We look forward to that conversation. We hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you right back here on Monday. Aloha.
Aloha.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Longstrugs.